All right, guys. So there's something I'm going to talk about here, just to make a point about what I call the illusion of certainty, which is when I'm going to argue that actually certainty is something that is deeply spatial, right? It's deeply spatial. Why? So let's take, for example, perception. But let's try to imagine perception without thinking, right? So if we pan over here, we see this line can just sort of be the ground, and space sort of allows us to, space sort of allows a contrast so that we can observe this object, see this object in space, right? Well, what's interesting about the perceptual field, or the field of perception, is that actually there's nothing that indicates conceptually that this is certainty, that seeing the object equals certainty, right? It's not until thinking takes over that we conceptualize the term certainty. It's not until thinking takes it up that we all kind of verify with each other, that we say, did you see that object? Did you see that too? I saw it. In which we all verify that the object is there. But again, the fact of the matter is that certainty itself does not become possible until we do a interpretation. So what ends up happening is that we have to do an interpretation of space. And what thinking does is that we don't realize it, is that it's already doing an interpretation of space once it starts interpreting this. So there seems to be a dual action sort of taking place here, where it's like, now remember, perception you can't derive anything from perception in the sense that you would be able to say that this is, for example, distance. Because the moment that you say that this is distance, or acknowledge that this is distance between where you are from and the object, you're already thinking, which means you're already also interpreting space. You're already giving a sort of interpretation about space. Now, what's kind of fascinating is that the repercussions of this idea, the very fact that we have an interpretation of space, is that, for example, we don't know how to encounter what we call excess, right? Sort of weird writing with my camera on. So we don't know how to encounter excess, but really the perceptual field gives us a better idea about how to encounter excess. So I'm just going to pan over here, perception. Okay. However, because we also think spatially, we think the best way to encounter excess is by thinking. And why is this a problem? Well, this is a problem because we think that we can, for example, we can construct whole systems that can, like, if you take this whole sheet of paper, right? If you think this whole sheet of, let's just say, for example, this whole sheet is the excess, right, itself. We begin to think that we can capture the excess by constructing a system, right? However, if you construct a system, you're just falling into, again, an interpretation of space. You're falling into the same sin by basically giving a spatial interpretation of the excess to which you think you can construct, let's say, a theory of everything. So we fool ourselves into thinking that we can construct a theory of everything. Because not only do we think spatially, but we think we can construct a system that can capture the excess and call it a theory of everything. That is one of the biggest issues right now. However, what's funny is that actually, if you think about it, right, like I'm going to shift over here a little bit. What's funny about excess is that, for example, we hear a sound, right? We hear sound. Oh, it's so weird writing my camera on. So we hear sound, right? But what we call silence, for example, is something we argue that we can't hear. But we know through science that actually there is sound, it's just that our ears cannot pick it up, which means that there is an excess to which my ears cannot engage with, because at that point, so what's interesting is that excess would give you the illusion of a sort of determination, right? So what does that mean? It means that, sorry, I'm a little sick, guys. It means that because your ears can't capture the excess, it has a sort of drop off point. It has what we call, like, there's a limit, right? But again, limit and determination is something that is, once again, deeply spatial. Because, and this is what's funny, is that because we can't capture the excess, we think that things actually have said limit, said determination, which feeds back into this whole concept of illusion of certainty. But certainty, it's not that we shouldn't have some kind of certainty, right? But just keep in mind that the reason why this is an illusion of certainty is because ultimately we can't capture the excess. We can't capture it. And because we can't capture it, we have to make an interpretation of space. But this interpretation of space makes us give determinations and identify limits. But this doesn't necessarily imply certainty. we could say certainty really is just the focal point of what we can capture. Focal point of what we can capture concerning the excess. So, I mean, just to go back to my same example, what we consider as silence typically is actually not silence because there's lower decibels and lower sound that we just can't pick up. And so this would make sense that when we believe in the certainty of silence, that things aren't themselves actually silent. So this means that silence itself becomes, we determine it as silence, but silence itself really is the limit from which we can no longer pick up sounds. But this limit is always provisional because we can never capture the excess as such. But the trap that we fall in is that we think because we can do an interpretation of space and deriving that interpretation by creating concepts such as determination and limit, we fall into the illusion of certainty, which certainty itself is always, in essence, spatial, or we can call it the focal point of what we capture about the excess. But all right. Thank you guys for listening to my TED Talk.